There's a house in coastal Maine that hasn't had a light on in over 30 years. The locals won't go near it after dark, not because they believe in ghosts or curses, but because of what happened there in 1993. What happened to the last Ashcroft daughter? Her name was Claire, and she was 19 years old when she disappeared from that house on an October night, leaving behind only a locked room, a wedding dress soaked in seawater, and a handwritten letter that began with the words, "I will not be the next one." The police searched for 6 weeks. They dragged the ocean, they combed the cliffs. They interviewed every member of the Ashcroft family, and every single one of them said the same thing, almost word for word, as if they'd rehearsed it. She knew what was expected. She chose to run. But here's what they didn't say. What they never said. For over 200 years, every firstborn Ashcroft daughter had participated in a family ritual on her 19th birthday. A ritual that took place in that house, in a locked room on the 3rd floor, with only the eldest women of the family present. And every single one of those girls, without exception, came out changed. Not traumatized, not afraid, changed as if something inside them had been switched off or replaced. Claire Ashcroft was supposed to be next. But Claire did something no Ashcroft daughter had ever done before. She refused, and what happened after that refusal tore apart one of New England's oldest families and revealed a tradition so disturbing that even now, decades later, the people who know about it won't speak of it on the record. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Ashcroft family came to Maine in 1791, shortly after the Revolutionary War. They were merchants, shipbuilders, traders who made their fortune in the early days of American commerce. The house they built still stands on a rocky promontory overlooking Penobscot Bay, a sprawling three-story colonial with widows' walks and a view of the Atlantic that stretches to the horizon. For generations, the Ashcrofts were pillars of the community. Respected, wealthy, untouchable. But if you talked to people who'd lived in that town long enough, who remembered the old stories their grandparents told, you'd hear something else. You'd hear that the Ashcroft women were different. That they moved through the world with a strange, unsettling calm. That they never seemed to age the way other women did. That their eyes had a flatness to them, like looking into still water with nothing beneath. And you'd hear about the daughters, always the firstborn daughters, how they'd be normal, vibrant girls until their 19th birthday. And then, after a single night in that house, they'd come back quiet, obedient, hollow. No one outside the family knew what happened in that 3rd floor room. The door was always locked. The windows were shuttered from the inside, but the town knew the pattern. Every generation, like clockwork, the eldest daughter would turn 19, and the women of the family would gather. The men were never allowed inside during the ritual. Not fathers, not brothers, not husbands. This was women's business, they'd say. This was tradition. And the next morning, the girl would emerge, and she would never be the same. Some people thought it was religious. A baptism of some kind. A Puritan rite that had survived into the modern age. Others whispered darker things, that the Ashcrofts had made a pact generations ago, that they'd traded something, promised something, in exchange for their wealth and status, that the daughters weren't being initiated. They were being offered, but these were just rumors, speculation, until Claire Ashcroft's mother, Margaret, made a mistake. She kept a diary, and in 2009, 16 years after Claire disappeared, that diary was found. Margaret Ashcroft had been the firstborn daughter of her generation. She'd undergone the ritual in 1954, when she was 19. The diary began 3 months before her birthday and ended 2 weeks after. The early entries are normal. A teenage girl writing about school, about boys, about wanting to leave Maine and see the world. But as her birthday approaches, the tone changes. She writes about her mother and grandmother pulling her aside. About them telling her that she's special, that she's been chosen for something important, that every Ashcroft woman before her has done this and it's made them strong, made them eternal. She writes that she's scared, but that she trusts them, that she knows they love her, that whatever happens in that room, it's for her own good. The final entry before her birthday is dated October 12th, 1954. She writes, "Tomorrow night, I become one of them. Mother says I won't remember the details, but I'll understand. She says I'll finally see what we really are. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready." The next entry is dated October 30th, 18 days later. The handwriting is the same, but the voice is completely different. Clinical, detached. It reads, "The girl I was is gone. This is acceptable. The continuation is more important than the individual. I have been prepared. I will prepare my daughter when the time comes." That's it. That's all the diary says about what happened in that room. But it's enough to understand that whatever took place, it wasn't a ceremony. It was a replacement. Margaret Ashcroft, the girl who wanted to see the world, who wrote about falling in love and dreaming of college, was erased. And something else, something that wore her face and spoke with her voice but wasn't her anymore, took her place. She went on to marry, to have children, to live a long, unremarkable life in that house by the sea. But the people who knew her said she was never warm, never spontaneous. She performed the role of mother, of wife, of community member, but it was exactly that, a performance. And when her own daughter, Claire, turned 18, Margaret began preparing her the same way she'd been prepared. With the same words, the same reassurances, the same gentle, inevitable pressure, but Claire had found the diary. She'd raided in secret, hidden in the attic among her grandmother's belongings. And unlike every Ashcroft daughter before her, Claire knew what was waiting for her in that third-floor room. She knew that if she went in, she wouldn't come back out. The weeks leading up to Claire's 19th birthday were tense. Her mother noticed she was pulling away, asking questions. Margaret tried to soothe her, tried to explain that this was love, that this was family, that every woman in their line had done this and lived full, meaningful lives afterward. But Claire wasn't convinced. She'd started researching, going through old family photographs, comparing the faces of Ashcroft women across generations. And she'd noticed something that made her blood run cold. They all looked the same, not similar, the same slight tilt of the head in photographs, the same empty half smile, the same way of holding their hands, folded at the waist, fingers interlaced. As if they'd all been taught the same gestures, the same mannerisms, by the same teacher. Or as if they were all expressions of the same thing, wearing different faces across different lifetimes. Claire confided in her boyfriend, a local boy named Derek Moss. She showed him the diary, told him she thought her family was involved in something inhuman, that the women weren't who they appeared to be. Derek didn't believe her at first. He thought she was having some kind of breakdown, that the pressure of family expectations had gotten to her. But then he met Margaret. He came to the house for dinner one night in late September, and he watched the way Claire's mother moved, the way she never blinked quite enough, the way she'd pause mid-sentence as if listening to something no one else could hear. And the way she looked at Claire, not with love, not with concern, with assessment, like a jeweler examining a stone. Derek helped Claire plan her escape. They decided she'd leave the night before her birthday, before the family could gather, before they could lock her in that room. He'd pick her up at midnight on October 18th, and they'd drive south, out of Maine, somewhere the Ashcrofts couldn't reach. Claire packed a bag. She withdrew what little money she had from her bank account. She wrote a letter to her younger sister, warning her, telling her to run when her time came. But she made one mistake. She told her aunt, her father's sister, who'd married into the family, who Claire thought might be an ally because she hadn't been born an Ashcroft. The aunt listened, nodded sympathetically, and then, the moment Claire left the room, she called Margaret. That night, October 17th, 1993, Derek Moss drove to the Ashcroft house at midnight, as planned. He parked down the road, lights off, and waited. Claire never came out. He waited an hour, then 2. Finally, at 3 in the morning, he drove up to the house and knocked on the door. Margaret answered. She was wearing a nightgown, her hair down, and she smiled at him with an expression that he later described as motherly and venomous at the same time. She told him Claire had changed her mind, that she'd realized running was childish, that she was upstairs now, preparing for tomorrow. Derek demanded to see her. Margaret said no. He tried to push past her, and that's when the other women appeared. Claire's grandmother, her great-aunt, 3 cousins he'd never met, all standing in the darkened hallway, silent, watching him with those same flat eyes. He ran. The next morning, Derek called the police, told them Claire was being held against her will. The police went to the house and spoke with Claire herself. She came to the door in a white dress, her hair braided, and told the officers she was fine, that she'd simply had a fight with her boyfriend and decided to stay home, that there was no problem. The officers asked if she wanted to leave. She said no. They asked if she felt safe. She said yes. And then she looked directly at Derek, who was standing behind the police car, and said in a voice he swears wasn't hers, "I chose this. Tell him I chose this." The police left. Derek didn't. He stayed in his car across from the house all day, watching. He saw the women arrive throughout the afternoon. Aunts, cousins, elderly Ashcroft women he'd never seen before, some who must have traveled from out of state. They went inside and didn't come out. At sunset, he saw them lead Claire upstairs. She didn't resist. She walked calmly, like a bride going to her wedding. And then the lights in the 3rd floor room came on. The shutters were closed, but Derek could see the glow through the cracks, and he could hear something, not screaming, not crying, singing, a low, droning melody in a language he didn't recognize. It went on for hours. At 2 a.m., the singing stopped, the lights went out, and 30 minutes later, the front door of the Ashcroft house opened. Claire walked out, alone. She was still wearing the white dress, but now it was soaking wet, dripping seawater onto the porch, even though she'd never left the house. Her hair was wet too, plastered to her face, and she was barefoot. Derek watched as she walked down the driveway, passed his car without looking at him, and headed toward the cliffs. He followed her, called her name. She didn't respond. She walked with mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her arms at her sides. When she reached the edge of the cliff, she stopped, stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly. And then she turned around. Derek said later that when she looked at him, it wasn't Claire looking back. It was something else, something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman wearing her face. She opened her mouth to speak, and what came out wasn't words. It was that same droning melody he'd heard from the house, but now it was coming from her throat, layered and harmonic, as if multiple voices were singing through her at once. And then she stepped backward off the cliff. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? They never found Claire's body. The Coast Guard searched for 2 weeks. Divers went down. They found nothing. The Ashcroft family held a memorial service without a body, and every woman in that family stood at the funeral with the same calm, practiced grief. Margaret gave a eulogy about how Claire had always been troubled, how she'd struggled with the weight of family expectations, how sometimes young people make impulsive choices. She never mentioned the ritual, never mentioned the 3rd floor room, and when reporters asked about the strange circumstances of her disappearance, Margaret simply said, "My daughter was unwell. I wish we could have helped her." The case was closed within a month. Ruled a suicide, but Derek Moss never let it go. He started digging into the Ashcroft family history, spending his inheritance on private investigators, genealogists, historians. What he found was a pattern going back centuries. In 1823, an Ashcroft daughter named Eliza disappeared the night before her 19th birthday. Her body was found 3 months later, washed up on a beach in Nova Scotia. In 1891, another daughter, Rebecca, threw herself down the stairs of the family home and broke her neck. In 1937, one named Sarah vanished entirely and was never seen again. Every few generations, one of them tried to run, and every single one of them either died or disappeared. The ones who went through with the ritual lived long lives. But the ones who refused never made it to 20. Derek published his findings in 2003 in a self-printed book that no major publisher would touch. He called it The Ashcroft Inheritance, a Family of Replacements. In it, he argued that the Ashcroft women weren't human. Not anymore, that something had been passed down through the female line for generations, something that required a new host every 19 years, that the ritual wasn't about tradition or religion, it was about continuation, about something ancient and oceanic that had found a way to survive by wearing human faces, living human lives, and perpetuating itself through daughters who had no choice. The book sold fewer than 300 copies. Most people dismissed it as the ramblings of a grieving man who couldn't accept his girlfriend's suicide. But there were some who read it and recognized the pattern. Other families, other coastal towns, other locked rooms and changed daughters. In 2007, Derek received a letter from a woman in Massachusetts who said her grandmother had been an Ashcroft before she married, that she'd undergone the ritual in 1921 and lived until 1998. Never aging past 40, never sick, never quite human. The woman included a photograph. Her grandmother at age 93 looked exactly like Margaret Ashcroft. Same face, same expression, same empty eyes. Derek died in 2015. Heart attack. He was only 41. Some people said it was the stress, the obsession, the years he'd spent chasing a truth no one wanted to hear. But others, the ones who'd followed his research, wondered if the Ashcrofts had finally gotten tired of him talking. The house in Maine still stands. It's been empty since Margaret Ashcroft died in 2011. No one in the family will claim it. No one will sell it. It just sits there on the cliff, windows dark, door locked, waiting. In 2018, a real estate developer tried to buy the property and turn it into a bed and breakfast. The sale fell through after the inspection. The inspector's report mentioned structural damage, water intrusion, the usual things you'd expect in an old coastal house. But there was one line in the report that didn't make sense. The inspector noted that the third floor room, the one with the shutters and the locked door, was filled with seawater. Not dampness, not water damage. 6 inches of standing seawater, cold and briny, even though the room was 60 feet above sea level and hadn't been opened in years. He refused to go back inside. Claire's younger sister, Emily, would have turned 19 in 2001. But in the summer of 2000, she left Maine and never came back. She changed her name, cut off all contact with the family. She lives somewhere in the Midwest now, under an identity Derek Moss helped her create before he died. She's never married, never had children. In a brief email exchange with a journalist in 2012, she said only this: "My sister saved my life by refusing. I won't dishonor that by continuing what she died to stop. The Ashcroft line ends with me." And maybe it has. Or maybe it's just waiting, because the thing about old families, about traditions that span centuries, is that they're patient. They don't need to rush. They've survived wars, plagues, generations of resistance. And they know that eventually someone always comes back. Someone always opens the door. The Ashcroft house still stands on that cliff in Maine. And on quiet nights when the fog rolls in from the ocean, people say you can still hear singing coming from the 3rd floor. Low and droning and inhuman. The sound of something that hasn't forgotten. Something that's still waiting for the daughter who got away.